Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be jazz. I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be jazz. I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be jazz. I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi. Osinachi, Namnukwa, Osinachi, one lemon, Osinachi, Apache, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi. Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be jazz. Apache, Osinachi, Namnukwa, Osinachi, one lemon, Osinachi, Apache, Osinachi, Mama, Osinachi.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? All right, thank you. Well, welcome everyone to session 7B of the LSA conference. Thank you, LSA. Thank you, Professor Said Aderinto, for the opportunity to share the documentary film we're going to be talking about today, and hearing from our panelists as they respond to the film, and also our filmmaker who is here with us. So our session is on the documentary film titled Behind My Nollywood Screen, a documentary film by Añulika, Agina. And we have a very special panel to talk about the film. But I just want to go through some processes that I would like to use in the 1.5 hours that we have to talk about the film. First of all, the panel itself was organized by Dr. Agina very thoughtfully, I must say, because of the selection of speakers that will be responding to the film. I am Tony Ada. I'm an instructor in film studies at Minnesota State University in Moorhead. I will be chairing mostly calling on people and keeping time. So it's easy peasy for me. I've got very little to do. We will just be enjoying the conversation with our panelists. We are supported, like I said, by a very special group. I'll mention their names very quickly, but I will introduce them in more detail when I call upon them to speak. We've got our filmmaker here, of course, Añulika Agina, but we have Professor Moradun Adejumobi, who is at University of California, Davis. We also have Professor Agina Sekwazi, who was also my film history professor at the University of Ibadan. And we have Dr. Shoaibu Hussaini, and a film director and producer, Tokbe Oshin. So you can see that our panel consists of experts, hardcore film theorists, historians, art commentators, creators, and producers. That's why I said the organizer put this together very thoughtfully. So moving on, I think what I'm going to do is introduce our filmmaker, then introduce the film, and follow up by calling on each of the panelists, at which time I will give a more detailed introduction of who they are. I will call on each of them to respond to the film, and then we will allow the filmmaker to sort of respond to their responses, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. For the panelists, it would be great if you can limit your response to no more than 8 to 10 minutes, so that we will have more time for conversation. So, very quickly, let me introduce our filmmaker, Dr. Añulika Agina. She's a postdoctoral research fellow at SOAS University of London. I believe she's just about rounding up that fellowship. She's also a senior lecturer in media studies at Pan Atlantic University, Lagos, where she teaches several courses in media studies and mass communication as well. In 2016, she completed a course on documentary filmmaking at the University of Cape Town and directed a couple of shorts while she was doing that. She's completing that fellowship at SOAS in the area of Nigerian screen worlds, where she produced and directed this documentary. So this documentary is sort of what we might call one of the outcomes, one of the many outcomes that she's delivering out of that fellowship project, which was funded by the European Research Council. The documentary made official selection at the IREP International Film Festival in March this year. Dr. Agina has also co-edited a forthcoming book on contemporary African screen worlds. Her current research is on cinema-going audiences, and she has published parts of that research in journals and edited books. Please join me in welcoming our filmmaker, Añulika Agina. All right, so now that the introduction is over, let her take a breather and move on to the rest of the session until I call on her again to respond. So our documentary, again, the title is Behind My Nollywood Screen. It enters a field where there have been other documentaries. I am reminded here of documentaries like This is Nollywood, by Franco Stacci and Robert Caputo, or Nollywood Babylon by Ben Adelman and Malar. And what is interesting about those documentaries is that they were focused on mostly producers and directors, and secondarily on performers. What is interesting about the documentary we're going to talk about today, though, is that it turns its lens. So it joins this corpus that already exists, but it turns its lens now away from creators and the works created into exhibition primarily, and secondarily in the area of distribution. So without much ado then, that is what I want to say about the documentary. I want to turn to introduce the guest panelist, Professor Moradeun Adejumobi, a seasoned expert on everything Nollywood and African cinema and African popular culture. She's at the Department of African American and African Studies at the University of California, Davis. She has previously taught at the University of Ibadan and University of Botswana. She's the author of 2 monographs and has published widely on Nollywood and Nigerian popular culture. Her research on Nigerian film, media, and performance has appeared in journals like Cultural Critique, Popular Communication, Black Camera, and Cinema Journal, among others. Please let us welcome Professor Adejumobi.
Thank you very much, Professor Ada, for that generous introduction. I thought I was going to have 20 minutes all to myself, so I'm going to do some quick thinking on my feet now.
Okay, let me increase the time to 10 minutes and a little.
But feel free to cut me off at whatever point
okay.
The time is up. So
right.
Let me go ahead. Behind my Nollywood screen is a 45-minute meta-filmic or meta-cinematic production. In other words, it's a film about filmmaking and especially about film exhibition and to some extent distribution. Having watched the film just twice in the past few days, I have a few thoughts about it. Now, as the chair of the panel pointed out, the documentary differs from other documentaries about Nollywood in that it does not feature filmmaker actors. It focuses principally on film exhibition and distribution, which fits in well with my own research interests. I'm very interested in distribution and exhibition. Although Wangi Mba Uzoku from Mnet Africa shares equal screen time with the other 3 film professionals who are interviewed in the film, this is really about film as cinema rather than film in television. And in keeping with Dr. Agina's own interests, well-known interest in audiences, it's a film that tries to walk through what is currently happening in film exhibition in Nigeria through the eyes of an audience member, OJ, who is a self-described, a Nollywood enthusiast, a cinephile, a lover of cinema. For most of the film, OJ is doing the interviewing, but sometimes, especially at the beginning and at the end of the film, he becomes the subject of the interview, and he's the one speaking to the camera. We're thus reminded that this is a response to questions that he is asking. I think it's an interesting choice not to use a scholar or an actor or a marketer or a film director, but someone whose claim to fame is simply, I love going to the cinema and I love Nollywood. This brings us to another way in which Behind My Nollywood Screen differs from other Nollywood documentaries, because we see the questions being asked by a Nigerian and the story being told through Nigerian eyes. The emphasis isn't on how shocking and amazing it is that Nigerians were able to create something like Nollywood. Instead, it's like, yes, we're Nigerians. We've always loved cinema, trying to do cinema business for ourselves. In this documentary, you don't have a foreign voice asking the questions, and you don't have the perception that there is an unseen foreigner who is not visible on screen, but to whom the answers are directed. This is very much a conversation among Nigerians who are lovers of cinema. One of the things that Nollywood itself in general, and Nollywood Studies in particular, has done for African cinema studies is to bring to the foreground questions about exhibition and distribution. If before the emergence of Nollywood, African cinema scholars tended to elevate the filmmaker as an almost autonomous figure and to suggest that the independence of African filmmaking lay in the hands of these autonomous figures, this documentary raises important questions about how exhibition and distribution can be handled in an African context. Ultimately, in my opinion, and I agree with this focus, until there is some degree of ownership of distribution and exhibition platforms, until there is, as Wangi Mba-Uzoku suggests, a complete ecosystem where Nigerian and other African media films predominate, Africans will remain minor figures in other people's media. Nollywood and other film and television initiatives have cracked open the door, but as the interviews with the cinema professionals in this documentary shows, there's still much to be done. Behind My Nollywood Screen devotes most of its attention to understanding how the film business has operated, mainly since around 2010 to the present time. So this is, it's a very up-to-date take on how the film business runs in Nigeria today. The informal side of the film business in Nigeria is completely missing from the documentary, and it's admittedly hard to document. At one point, Wangi Mba-Uzoku says with an acerbic tone, I don't know about those people who are able to watch Africa Magic without having taken out a subscription. In fact, she even seems to suggest that Mnet Africa may be losing as much as half of its expected revenue from those tapping into the network without paying, which would be quite astounding. We know a lot already about piracy in the early period of Nollywood, and of course, piracy has not disappeared. But it's interesting and perhaps should not be surprising to learn that there are new ways of circumventing the current distribution mechanisms and exhibition mechanisms in Nigeria. Echoing a point that was made by Alessandro Jedlowski in a panel yesterday, that is Wangi Mba-Uzoku, also points out that new Nollywood and even what some might call neo-Nollywood has not completely displaced old Nollywood. And to make the case, she points to the Epic channel in the Africa Magic lineup, which she seems to indicate might be their strongest channel out of the 7 that they currently have. And she says, there's a reason why Africa Magic Epic is a very strong channel. For her, this indicates a continuing demand for the kinds of stories that were associated with old Nollywood. Having a local cinephile poses the questions in the documentary has advantages, but it also has some disadvantages because there were answers given that a scholar might have followed up on. For example, asking about the scale of losses that Mnet Africa claims to be suffering. I would have wanted interviews with contemporary filmmakers who belong to this current, new Nollywood generation. I would have wanted to understand the film business from their point of view, especially as Moses Babatokwe and Wangi Mba-Uzoku in particular seemed somewhat defensive in speaking about those they described as content creators. Sometimes they didn't even acknowledge them as film. It's like, it's a content, right? I would have wanted to get a sense, I would have wanted to hear from those making the films that are subsequently licensed to Mnet Africa to get a sense of what they see as the future for film distribution and exhibition and what this means for the kind of media and aesthetic choices that they are making. I noticed that in the film, the cinema theaters were often quite empty. And I didn't know whether that was because of COVID or a decision was made to shoot the film at times when there were relatively few people in the cinema. I was somewhat taken aback that the cinema exhibitors did not see the emergence of streaming as competition for their business, but as a sign of appreciation or as a way to make up for the fact that Nigeria still doesn't have enough cinema space. This was the view in particular from Joy Ife Odiete, who's the chief executive for Blue Pictures. And it may be because streaming still has limited reach within Nigeria itself. I would have thought that they would be a little bit more apprehensive about what streaming might do to cinema exhibition. OJ, who takes us through the film, is, as stated earlier, a self-described Nollywood enthusiast who can also be seen as a cinephile. And for this reason, I would go so far as to say that this is a film starring Nigerian cinephiles for other cinephiles. And this makes it an extremely useful resource, not just for scholars of Nollywood, but for African film enthusiasts in general. My final question is about the distribution of this film. How will scholars and students of cinema across the world who are fascinated by Nollywood be able to access it. This is certainly a film that I would want the library at my university to acquire. And I know that my colleagues in the cinema and digital media department at the University of California, Davis, which happens to include a Nigerian filmmaker, will be very interested in this documentary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See, you made it way less than 20 minutes. All right. Okay. Okay, thank you very much behind my Nollywood screen. So I'm going to introduce our second respondent, Professor Agina Sekwazi. I hope you're there. I can see your picture.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So Professor Ekwazi is it teaches in media arts, researches and teaches in media arts. He's a professor of broadcasting and film at the University of Ibadan. And he also adjuncts at the School of Media and Communication at Pan Atlantic University, Lagos. He's a pioneer consulting director for the NFI, that's the Nigerian Film Institute, JOS. He was a former director general, Nigerian Film Corporation, JOS as well. He was a lead trainer and consultant, World Bank capacity building project for Nollywood. He's also been head of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting heading the consultancy related to multimedia in that particular institution as well. He designed the BA in film production at Pan Atlantic University, the BSc in film and multimedia program for the National University of Please help me welcome Professor Ekwazi as he responds to my Nollywood screen.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tony. And it's good to be among these scholars. I think we all have something in common, and that is this film. And I think our background also emerges somewhere, that we're all researchers in the same field. Professor Adejumobi has raised quite some issues. You see, the thing about a panel like this is that you find that the issues you want to talk about, somebody will have touched on them, and you don't go repeating them. So talking after her, maybe I'll take less time than she has taken. So let me try to look for new areas I'll talk about. Number one is I enjoy this film. First, because the film has dared, it has tried, what they say about trying. It's easy to make a film about. You've just mentioned some of the things that talked about content, about the content of the Nollywood film, about the history of the Nollywood film. You mentioned them. In fact, there is one, and that is the Nigerian version, and that is Pioneers and Practitioners. It's a film that tries to document everything to do with the rise of Nollywood, from celluloid into the Nollywood era. So what Agina has done here is to try to carve out, to go a different way. Otherwise, she'll be treading in the footsteps of these other filmmakers. And so in doing that, so she has tried to concentrate, like Professor Dejumi has rightly noted, in the area of exhibition. So she has taken on the issue of business, that is the business of film. But she has approached this business from an angle that I can't quite determine. Is the approach historical? Is it analytical? Because at the end of the day, and that's what Prof has identified, making the interviewer she has in the film, many questions ought to have come in. He raises more questions than are answered. I think it's because who he is, an enthusiast. So if he's seeing the Nollywood screen and he's seeing all these things, he throws up many questions that for me beg for an answer. So the only way I can resolve this is to say it is difficult to talk about history if you decide to do history from an economic point of view, which is what she has tried to do. You see, taking on that throws up a number of challenges. What then do you use? What visuals do you use to talk about economics, to talk about the business end of film? So what do you use? And so she has fallen into this trap of using content to talk, essentially content, the content of the films, to talk about the economic end of filmmaking. Very, because if you want to talk, if it is the business end, give us some business issues to bite into. And really, I don't find much of this. So I find, yes, there is this thing about, West African pictures, then the Mnet and the rest of them. But at the end of the day, what is the worth of filmmaking in Nigeria? Because for me, like I said, it's many issues have been raised that have not been answered. And I think it was, why did they go into it? I think the guy raised the question at the end. So why did they go into this? Are they realizing the very reason that took them into exhibition? If they are, how are they realizing this? So not answered. If they are not, why are they not realizing this? Unanswered. And then the other issue is the issue of titling. I know that when it comes to titling the documentary, there are too many contradictions that we've seen in production. But I do know also, if you take the guy who was this guy, Columbine, is it John Moore, the guy who did Columbine? You are going to find out when he came out with Columbine, it was the other film before Columbine, if I can remember the title. He seems to have set a kind of trend in the documentary filmmaking. But by and large, you don't title a documentary film the way you title a feature film. The title of a documentary film should tell you what the documentary is all about immediately. You don't need to watch the documentary to know what the title is about. Sorry, you don't need to watch the film to know what the title is about or what the title is telling you. It says behind my Nollywood screen. So what does it really tell me about the business of film? What does it tell me about exhibition? It's a title that goes every which way. It does not really address the issue. And that is not the way titling is done in the documentary. For a feature film, it will pass. Documentary title must ab initio tell you what it's going to talk about. So that's one. So because for me, my Nollywood screen, it raised a lot of questions that it didn't answer for me. And so what about behind my Nollywood screen? Is it what I see behind is it the behind scene issues? So it left me wondering. So the other issue to do also, which I'm trying to link up with the structure, you see, this is a documentary that within the American tradition, balance them 50-50 because you are giving news. Picture is as important as the audio you are using to back up the picture. Who doesn't go with other documentaries? And so when I sit back and I watch this, better approach would have been that news documentary angle, which would have given the interviewer room to explore a lot of issues. And then what does the filmmaker do when these issues, if you watch the typical American something, it is full of repetition, which is allowed in such approaches to the documentary. So we have here a documentary that would have profited immensely if it had been made in that format. The very format it adopted raised serious issues. That is why you have the graphics. At a period towards the beginning, you have those graphics, not the translation of what the person did, but you have those graphics trying to explain certain issues in the area of the cinema. That because the filmmaker here is working within the old tradition of the documentary. And so for me, that was a problem I saw, because she did not quite resolve how she's going to handle the issues. Then you see, I will come back to I think everybody will come back to this same issue of many things left, really. How did the Mnet get into this whole thing? How did how did Africa Magic get into this distribution? How did they get into it? Left, she is saying that they have how many channels where they show this? Yes, you do have it. How did you get into it? What competition were you to beat when you got into it? This is particularly of interest to me, because as at the time Mnet got into it, as at the time Africa Magic got into it, I was heading the Nigerian Film Corporation. And I remember calling the filmmakers. I remember going to the National Council on Information to ask that I be allowed to float a TV channel to show only Nigerian films. But the National Council said, no, what you can do, liaise with NTA, get a dedicated channel from NTA, and then just show Nigerian films. I convened a meeting of Nigerian filmmakers. Let us discuss this issue. We are to share the proceeds into three: one for my corporation, one for the filmmakers, and one for NTA. But that didn't happen, because the filmmakers came up with some terrible arguments. If I make my film with 100 naira, you make your film with 50 naira, are you going to pay us the same figure? That's where the meeting ended. And that same day the meeting ended, a week later, these guys came up with Africa Magic. Those same filmmakers that attended that meeting, they contacted them. They stole into that business. So how did they come into it, and how have they fared since they came into it? So I come back to what Professor Adejobi said, because questions were raised or were not followed up. Answers were not followed up with questions. And so you were just left there, And because of the nature of the person used here, you find that it would have been better to create a situation where there would be a final summing up, to tie up all the loose ends, because too many questions were not asked, too many answers were not given. There would have been need to then tie up everything. Let me then ask you, for instance, how many screens do we have in the country? I don't think it was mentioned anywhere. We are dealing with matters of business. So how many screens do we have in the country? How many seats do we have? And how many shows do we have? Yes, each of them could say, in my own cinema, it is this, in my own, it is this. But there will be the need for a tying up at the end, because this is the business end of filmmaking. That's what we are. So there would have been a problem.
So, Prof, we need to be rounding up here.
Yes, I'm rounding up.
Okay, thank you.
I'm talking about how the film should have rounded up. You see, so I'm saying that the proper rounding up there would have been to tie up the things together. So for me, that left me high and dry. But having said all that, I would just want to ask the filmmaker one final question. What is the value of this film? There is this thing about, if you go to the Arts and Motion Pictures definition of what a documentary is, it tends to talk about the value of the documentary. And that once a documentary has achieved its purpose, that documentary becomes useless. So what is the value of this documentary before we can assess, will it have achieved its purpose at a certain time? But all the same, notwithstanding anything I've said, I enjoyed watching the documentary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Ikwazi. Lots of questions there that we hope we'll be able to tie up by the end of today's conversation. Okay, so let me move on for the sake of time here to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Shuaibu, Husseini Shuaibu. I believe he completed his doctorate in mass communication from the University of Lagos a few years ago. He's a trained and seasoned theater, film, broadcast, public relations, and culture expert. He's an alumnus of the United States International Visitors Leadership Program and the Blavatnik School of Governance of the University of Oxford. He's a well-known documentarist of Nigeria's movie industry, a very regular commentator on the arts, theater, and film in Nigeria and Africa. Dr. Hosseini has also been very active in the exhibition sector as well, because he's the chair of the selection committee of Africa's premier film award, that's African Movie Academic Award, AMA, where he's also a juror. Shoaibu has attended several conferences, workshops, and festivals. He has sat in several committees concerning those festivals, and he's a board chair, board member of several festivals around the globe. He is also the author of a monograph, Moviedom, the Nollywood Narratives, a monograph published in 2010. Currently, he's a senior teaching and research fellow at the Mass Communication Department, University of Lagos. He's a current member of Nigeria's Selection Committee, responsible for Nigeria's entry in the Best International Film category of the Oscars. So he's a key contributor to the cultural sphere of Nigeria and the African continent. Please welcome Dr. Shoaibu. All right, I'll give it to you at this point.
All right.
You probably want to unmute.
So I've done that now, Prof. Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Ada, for that very generous introduction. And I want to also thank Agina, Doctor, for this opportunity to be on this panel, and also thank the earlier speakers, particularly Professor Adejumobi, and then of course my mentor, Professor Aijido Sekwazi. And when these two masquerades have spoken, I mean, when they have given their talk, little rats like us, you will not even just go there. But I mean, we're here to contribute to knowledge. We're here to see how we can also add our voice to the growing discourse around the Nollywood film industry. All right, behind my Nollywood screens. Actually, when I heard first about the documentary, and I actually look forward to seeing it during the IREP, I thought it was just going to be some, because some behind the scene, how they do it behind and not in front of the camera. I actually did not know that the focus was going to be on distribution, which makes this particular documentary for me unique, because most of the time, the focus has always been about the performance, how Nollywood is conquering territories and all that. Nobody had actually cared about, doing something around distribution. And that is why, for me, I find this particularly the focus of the documentary very unique, even though the title was particularly misleading for me, but I found it very unique. And I see this filmmaker trying to provide us with a situation account, especially with details of effort by some individuals and institutions in the distribution space who are doing everything possible to make sure that we get, our distribution working in the right direction. But one of the questions I would like to ask, so that I don't miss it out, because I'm just going to make a comment, I really would not want to read anything that I've written. I just want to just drop a question, and that will there be a part 2, or will there be a follow-up to this documentary? Because like all the earlier speakers have noted, there is a lot of issues that were left very, very hanging. But let me say, for instance, I mean, let me also say that one of the things I like about this is that we're going to have someone from within the industry, you know, telling us this story, knowing those meet, knowing those to talk and all that. This is what makes this different because these other documentaries that we've had, you will just sit down and see a documentary and you find people who are talking about the business of filmmaking or even the practice of filmmaking that they know nothing about, that you think that they know nothing about. But here, she uh, particularly spent so much screen time on the representative of WAP distribution. And I was wondering whether distributors were the only distributors who were around at that time. I doubt if they were the only ones who were around. Although they were well structured, but there were other distribution companies. I even found that we missed completely those distribution structures that that were on ground even before WAP Limited came into the business. Also, what I thought, I will just dwell mostly on what I think is missing in the documentary. And what I think was also missing in the documentary was that these guys were just in the world of their own, telling us about their businesses, telling us about how, the challenges they face here and there. But they didn't provide us with anything to hold on to in terms of stats, in terms of numbers, which is a big issue because whether we like it or not, the distribution, we have gone back to theatrical distribution quite all right, but it is not working for some filmmakers. Some filmmakers just see these guys as ripping them off. So we needed to find out, even from some filmmakers who have taken their films to exhibition, to corroborate some of those, some of those claims, I call them claims now, that some of these distribution companies make. For instance, Wangi was asked that these filmmakers complained that you were paying them so less and so small for what they give to African Magic. And our only explanation was that, hey, we are not buying, we are commissioning. But how much are you, we are, I think she said something like commissioning. But how much are you commissioning those contents? You commission them for some small amount of money, and then the contract is something that you exploit the film even beyond their territories. Incidentally, one of our panelists was here when in France, we saw that a film that was licensed to, licensing, she called it licensing, a film that was licensed to a company in Nigeria was aired in somewhere in France. So we needed to find out from them, we needed like a follow-up questions on some of these issues that we have on the business side, since the focus of the documentary at the end of the day was on the business side of the industry. I didn't find much discussion, like Prof observed, on the world of filmmaking. What are the figures? Where are we today in terms of figures? What are those figures that, in the days of Nigerian Film Distribution Company, in the days of the Ogun days, we could tell how much we made from the box office and all that. What are the figures? Up to today, there are disputes about figures that get to the filmmaker at the end of the day. Some of these things were not exploited. We were just more interested on the almost like the historical part, who came in first, who started, where are we today, and all that. It was, this documentary should have gone beyond that to let us begin to know things like that. We should have interrogated one or two filmmakers who have taken their films to these exhibitors and let us hear their own challenges, let us hear their own complaints and all that, so that we can make it all around. And even if we're looking at this film from the audience perspective, from the perspective of the audience, I would have expected that somehow, even when we went to some of those cinemas during the screening time, we would have spoken to them about to tell them, because I particularly found one question that the OJ asked the filmmaker, how are the audience receiving the film? Definitely, a cinema owner will tell you, oh, they are fine with the film. They will have spoken to one or two other enthusiasts, around the area, so that we can have their own feeling about that. So, again, one thing that is completely missing is that theatrical distribution is not the only form of distribution in the country. We forgot the very traditional direct-to-video release. And interestingly, in the film, we had the video cassette, the VHS cassette, which was used to have captions on them to show us different segments of the film. I thought that we would have taken a progression and also we'll have tried to find out what is happening to that aspect of our distribution. Because whether we like it or not, they are still doing business in Upper Añulika in Onitsha. They are still doing business in Pound Street in Aba. They are still doing business in Kano, and they are still doing business in Idumota. We will have done that. And then most of all, a lot of follow-up questions. I know that the guy is an enthusiast, so he couldn't have, followed the discussion to know what to plug in. But there was a filmmaker behind the screen. The filmmaker will have put in those questions, and then from there we'll get more details, more facts. There were a lot of, stuff that were left out of the screens, but over and above, I see this as a valuable addition. I mean, that is done even from within. Shows that, we could do much more. We could interrogate these issues much more and then provide something that our friends, our scholars, or those who are interested in the studies in the scholarship, in Nollywood scholarship, can work on. So for now, that's what I would just end with.
Thank you so much for those reflections, Dr. Hosseini. Very insightful questions and comments. Okay, so we're going to move to our last panelist, who is in the thick of all of this. Tokwe Oshin. Tokwe Oshin is a filmmaker. She's also the CEO of Sunbow Productions. She's directed several important films, including Up North and Amaka's Kin, the only documentary that I know of so far on Nigeria's leading female filmmakers. Filmmaker Amaka Igwe, who has unfortunately done. Tokwe is a multi-award-winning filmmaker with over 25 years of experience in film and the TV industry. She is the director of films like Wedding Party 2, Philly, directed 2 of the top 10 box office grosses of all time in Nigeria, New Money and Up North that I mentioned earlier on. And among her other directed and produced TV series, MTV Sugar, Castle and Castle, and Tinsel. She's also involved in many other organizations related to the TV and film industry, such as Ebony Life Studios, MultiChoice, MTV Staying Live Foundation, to mention a few. I've already mentioned Amaka's Kin, the Women of Nollywood. But she's followed up this documentary with another material that was made for the BBC, and that is Nigeria Shooting It Like a Woman. And in that documentary, the focus is on celebrating new generation of women filmmakers in the Nigerian film industry. She is the recipient of several awards as well. And she also serves in several film festivals and award bodies, including AFRIF, AMVCA, Echo International Film Festival, London Feminist Film Festival, and International Emmys Award, where she has been a juror since 2015. Please welcome Tokwe Oshin as she responds to the documentary.
Thank you very much for having me. After listening to my very respectable professors, I feel like I should have been in the audience to just listen and soak in all the knowledge, that is coming from this panel. I feel very much like I should just be an observer on this panel. So forgive me if I don't speak as much, but listen a lot because I mean, traditionally and culturally, there's a lot to learn going into the else, and that's what I'm doing for the past 30 minutes or so. Listen to my professors and Dr. Husseini, who I call Ogami, sir. He's been my friend, my Oga, my everything, my colleague. Our relationship has transcended also levels over the years and decades. Basically, congratulations, Dr. Añulika, for this documentary. Some years ago was exactly where you sit right now when I made Amaka's Skin, the Wing of Nollywood. And you will agree with me that documentary filmmaking is not one of the most popular forms of filmmaking in Nigeria. I was asked a question even at the time when I made the documentary, why, you know, there were loads of my colleagues who kept asking me, also, why did you make this documentary? Were you commissioned? Are you getting paid for it? Are you, you know, there are so many questions because for them, as any observer of the Nigerian space would know, a lot of things is about making money. But, you know, at the time that I did that, and I'm sure that even finally, you know, what is important is to document who we are, what we're doing, the problems that we have, and try to see if we can find solutions, you know, to those problems, or just have those conversations amongst ourselves and, you know, sort of appraise what exactly it is that we're doing, and to leave something for people like us in the future who are looking for these answers as well. One of the difficulties that I encountered at the time, I think I also spoke to Dr. Shaib at the time, was looking for archival material to put all of this together. You're trying to tell a story, you're trying to, you know, document something, but you have, you know, little or nothing to go by. And you find that along the line, you are having to, you know, infer things by yourself and pull things together by yourself. So based on that, you know, the first thing I'll say to Dr. Agina is well done. I know that a lot of work has gone into putting this together and, you know, presenting us with what we've been able to see. I did have a good time watching a documentary. And I think that at this point, if years, you know, away from my point, it felt good to be the one watching and not the one making, because just to give back to all the trouble, you know, that it took for me making that particular one. And I still haven't recovered because it's been a couple of years and I still haven't made another documentary. So that being said, a lot of questions have been asked, which I also have to ask. But then also, so I'm going to mix my questions and my comments and my thoughts, you know, all together with talking about my experience watching the documentary. So my first question watching it was, why didn't Añulika present this herself? You know, I felt like we would have had a stronger voice. I felt like a lot of those questions that I'm missing would have been answered better. Like Dr. Hussein said, coming from the mouth of the filmmaker herself. Nevertheless, I know that there's a lot of the questions that the cinephile asked that came from you, and you know, he acted as your voice. But I do believe like there were a lot of follow-ups that you could have done on the fly as you were having all those important conversations with all those people. That being said, the content of the documentary also for a filmmaker like myself is very useful. Because if you're an observer of what we're doing in the industry, there are so many blurred lines. There's so many questions we don't have answers to, even as practitioners, even as the ones making the films. A lot of us are making the films for the love of it. A lot of us are making the films for the money they can get from it. A lot of us are making these films to put food on the table. You know, so the different filmmakers have different reasons for being in the industry. And there's also at the same time a lot of confusion and a lot of information that is not in the public domain. So you basically take what you see, whatever you're handed is what you accept. So this docu, for a couple of filmmakers, in as much as it misses some particular elements, also answers some questions that filmmakers might have Sorry, is my audio good enough, please? And it's low.
A little bit low.
A little bit muffled, but okay, we can get it.
Thank you.
So it offers some answers to some questions that filmmakers have had here and there, as for wanting to know exactly what goes into distribution. Why was my film taken? Why wasn't my film taken? Why is this film making more money than my film? You know, and little bits of things here and there like that. We don't always get to sit with people like Joy of Blue Pictures. We don't get to sit with Moses all the time. These are all very busy people who are attending to the whole industry of filmmakers. And it was interesting listening to Moses speak and giving reasons based on how they operate, how they select films, how they determine if a film is good or not. Interestingly, you would observe where he said, we need filmmakers to get out of their indie mind. We need you to not be overly dramatic with your stories. You need to decide if you want to be a part of this game or not, and things like that. And those are very salient points. I listened to that part about 3 or 4 times because that is, yes, because that is a continuous argument, you know, amongst filmmakers, where you say to yourself, okay, based on my training, based on my experience, based on international standards, I know that this is what a good film is. These are the elements that should go into making a good film. Now, I cannot necessarily make what I know to be a good film because essentially the exhibitor has told me that it would not be a commercial success. Now, these are the kind of problems that a filmmaker like me, and I have a couple of colleagues who sit in my same chair, have had operating within the industry, where you are forced, when you decide to make a film, to dumb it down to a particular level because you are being told that this is what will sell or this is what the audience wants, you know. And this made me smile when I can't remember who it was Dr. Hussein that mentioned it, where he said, what is missing from the conversation is let's talk to the audience what they want. You know, the exhibitor says, oh, this is what the audience wants. These are the kind of films that I can sell to them because this is what I think that they want, or this is what they want. But have we spoken, have we taken the time to collect this data directly from the audience and not through the mouth of the exhibitors and the distributors, and actually ask them, what kind of films do you enjoy? What kind of films do you want to watch? You know, are you being spoon-fed? Are you taking what you're being given? Or, you know, you are not getting what you want, or there's more that you want that we're not making. You know, this is a conversation that we need to have. So it would have been interesting if, as deep as we went into conversations with the exhibitors and the distributors, we also went into those same conversations and interacted with the people who go to the cinemas, who watch these films, and actually ask them, what did you want? Because now, there are certain films that I cannot walk up to someone like Moses and say, Moses, I'm making this film and I want you to exhibit it for me. I want you to be my distributor. You might be outright turned down and said, you know what, I can't do anything with this film. Case in point is Up North. My last feature-length film, well, not my last release, because I have another one that's yet to be released. Up North didn't belong to me, but I directed it. At the point when they were trying to secure a distribution deal, they were told that it wasn't a commercial film and that it might not do well because it didn't fit in the mold of what they were used to, of it being farcical or being slapstick or having all those elements, you know, that they feel like the audience, the Nigerian audience wants. And, you know, the owner of the film was told in plain terms that it wasn't going to be a commercial success and they were having difficulty accepting the film to be distributed. But then the filmmaker basically just said, you know what, I'm not interested in the commercial gain from this film. I just want this film to be exhibited. I want the world to see this film. I have made this film the way I want the film to be. This is the story I want to tell, release it anyway. So based on that, that film was released. And at the premiere, the distributor, Moses himself, was like, oh my God, this is such a surprise. Like a week after the film was released, the film was doing so well, the film made so much money. And he said, this is a shock to us. We didn't know that the audience wanted this. We didn't know that they would love this. You know, that got me thinking, you know, to say, are you spoon feeding the audience? Are you speaking falsely for them, or are you letting them choose what they want? If indeed, based on whatever observations they've had as distributors, they are able to predict and tell us what the audience wants, how then are you being surprised by some films where you've categorically stated that they are not going to be successful? So that's the part that I very interesting within the documentary, and I felt this needs to lead to a whole conversation, you know, outside of the film as a second opinion or a second part of it that we need to conclude or to round up the entire discussion.
All right. So, Doko, we need to be rounding up now. Oh, you're done. Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited about the responses to the documentary. Very important questions have been raised by the panelists, and I'll give sort of equal time to the filmmaker to respond as well, and then we'll spend the rest of the time taking other questions and comments. So over to you, Anuli. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tony. And huge thanks to the panelists. I am so grateful to you for the time that you've taken to watch this documentary and raise these questions. And as you spoke, it occurred to me that to a certain extent, I fulfilled the objective of this documentary, which is one of which is that I wanted to raise questions. I wanted to raise many questions about film exhibition and the audiences of film in Nigeria. I take all the points that you have made to heart, and I'm going to continue reflecting on them. But you see, this documentary was intended as a short. So my brief was a 30-minute documentary, you know, on whatever aspect of a Nigerian film industry that's of interest to me. And my initial response to that was to make a documentary on the audiences. And we actually started that. So with OJ and 6 other people, or 5 other people, because there were 6 in all, we filmed a focus group discussion of OJ and those other 5 talking about their interests in Nigerian film, what genre they liked, when they would go to the cinema, where they watched the films, whether on television or on their smartphones, and so on and so forth. Because I wanted to use that in telling the story of the exhibitors as well. I wanted it to be like a conversation between the exhibitors and the audiences. But for very many technical reasons, I didn't get to use the audience part. So here I'm explaining why some of the absences that you correctly identified in the film were there. I also wanted to tell a contemporary story. First, I wanted to tell a contemporary and a positive story, something like pushing back those kinds of narratives that we get when foreigners come to Nigeria to make films about the Nollywood industry, as Professor Dejimobi pointed out. You know, I wanted to start by resisting that, to show that there are positive things coming out of this industry, and also that we haven't heard the voices of these exhibitors, because when you look at the scholarship on Nigerian film, we don't hear anything about exhibitors. We don't hear their voices. We don't know what it is they want. And also, I wanted to get into the head of these exhibitors and bring out some of their major concerns by just focusing on something on a very relatively short period and also making it very contemporary. In fact, the parts of Mr. Adesanya, I don't want to say they were not supposed to be there, because I also wanted to make that link between now and what existed in the past. So yes, it was a bit of struggle deciding on exactly what would make the final cut. But I'm very happy, I'm very excited about this documentary because it is raising the kinds of questions that I wanted to raise, which is who's behind my Nollywood screen? In other words, who's exhibiting, who's distributing this, and what are the kinds of things, what did they intend, what was their vision, and what are the kinds of hurdles that they have to get through in order to light up our film screens. Yes, I do agree that there are missing links, and some of those missing links are actually contained in the entire interview. So what I have done, and this is in response to Dr. Shaibu's question, will there be a part two? No, there won't be a part two documentary, but there will be the supply of the missing links, because I have published, or I'm attempting to publish, the entire interviews of Moses and Mr. Adesanya and Joy and Co, so that people would have access to all of those conversations. Many questions were raised, and I may not be able to do justice to all of these questions right now in this 10-minute slot, but I'll just keep talking. And when the time's up, you can stop me so that the audience would have an opportunity as well. Excuse me. Why did I, so I'm now going back to the beginning from Professor Dejimobi's question, why did I not use a scholar? Part of the explanation for that is that I wanted to make a film about audiences and exhibitors as well. And I needed someone who is a fan of Nollywood. And I saw that person in OJ. And OJ also, and this responds to one of the questions I saw in the chat. In the literature on Nollywood, we've seen that it's women who love Nollywood, mostly. And also in the previous research that I have done, the number of women that go to the cinemas is a lot higher than the number of men. So when I found a man who loves Nollywood so much to want to engage me so deeply about it, I thought that he was the right person to use, just as a way of debunking that narrative or that myth that it's only women who tend to watch Nollywood films. She asked something about the informal side of film distribution. Yes, that was left out deliberately because I thought there's only so much I can fit into this short documentary. Of course, it ended up being 45 minutes, which means that I exceeded the time that I intended to make it for originally. Why wasn't there interviews with contemporary films? Thank you so much for that question. It was important to me to tell, and this also links to a point that Professor Kwesi made and Dr. Shaibu made. Why weren't there contemporary filmmakers? I didn't want to bring to the fore anything that's already in the public domain. So, seen documentaries about filmmakers, and I thought, I don't want to do that. I don't want to have to do another documentary or even another interview, because again, there are lots of journalistic interviews about filmmakers, Kunle Afolayan, Izujuku and Co. I didn't just want to repeat that. I wanted to bring out and raise questions about film exhibitors. So it was important to me not to add any of those things. One of the questions that I have received from a previous screening is, why wasn't Mo Abudu featured in this documentary, because she's also an important figure. And it's the same answer that I have, even though yes, she is an exhibitor, which is fairly recent in comparison to the others, is that there's already so much about Mo Abudu out there. You only need to Google her name and you see, and I thought she's not the only one, there are many others. So I put in her place Joy, who many people don't know about. Who knows Joy Ifediati? Meanwhile, she's been in this business of film distribution for over 20 years. She actually started with New Metro, the South African company, worked her way up to now build her own cinemas in Lagos Island. So it was important to tell the stories of people who we seldom hear about in the literature. Why weren't their audiences featured? Okay, I think I already answered that partly. Not surprised by the competition. Well, the exhibitors give the forthright answers that's based on their work. It's not that they're not worried about the competition, but I think they're embracing the reality, which is that there will be streaming. That's at some point, Joyce said, streaming has come to stay. There's nothing you can do about it. So it is a concern. But again, that's why Moses said that they have to up the ante. They have to ensure that the experience of cinema going continues to be improved for the audiences so that they don't ever think that they have to settle at home and not have to go there and so on and so forth. Okay, now I'm jumping and I'm losing my train of thoughts, but I wanted to speak to also the point about some of the missing links and why I didn't feature that. Film House Cinemas is now publishing a yearbook which is dense with information, statistics, box office takings, number of cinemas in the country that they have, even number of cinemas of their competitors. There is a lot in that yearbook. It is so rich with information. And I just showed a page of it when Moses was speaking as a way, again, of pointing people to the kinds of questions that I want them to be asking, right? And also staying faithful to my idea of don't show us what's already in the public domain. Show to your audience what people don't know enough about and what can lead them to asking other questions. Professor Kwasi raised, okay, and then distribution and all. I think this would answer all the concerns or questions about distribution. So this is a research project. It was funded by the European Research Council and it's open access. All our research outcomes are open access. So it's going to be on the Screenwall's website for all to see. So it isn't monetized in any way. So everyone's welcome to take a look at it. But first, we want to show the film. We want the UK premiere in London. So I'm going to have to wait till that is over before we now make it publicly available to all. So please keep an eye. I can also share it on the LSA Facebook page at that time so that people who are interested can take a look at it. What's the value of this film? That was Professor Kwasi's question. I thank you very much, Professor Kwasi, for all the points that you've raised. I'm really happy that you engaged with this. The value of the film, as I have been trying to say, is that I wanted to raise questions about exhibition. I wanted to attempt to start filling the gap of the absence of exhibition studies and hopefully point many other people in that direction to create some kind of starting point, so people can then be to see what kinds of questions they have to, they can ask. Because one of the things that brought this exhibition to my mind and kept it there for a long time has to do with the question of access, right? Which is why I'm very excited about Netflix for what it does for me as a researcher, because today I can just go to Netflix and watch the films that have had their run in the cinema. Years ago, that didn't happen. If I wasn't able to go to the cinema when the films were there, then that was it. I had to wait for 3, 4, or even 5 years to get it anywhere else. Okay, and that's changing now. And so when it happened that I could now watch these films on Netflix and sometimes Iroko, but Iroko has a certain kind of films, okay, that appeals to its own market, its own niche. That led me to the question of exhibition and who's responsible for it, who's doing it, and why are they doing it, and what kinds of issues do they have in their minds, or challenges, or whatever else that they're thinking about. Okay, about the misleading title. Well, I've spoken to that particular point. What informed the title? Again, it's about exhibition. Who's responsible for it? Who's behind? Yes, I do agree that it's open to very many interpretations, but can't we say that every film text is open to multiple interpretations? Maybe. I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing, which is not to say that I don't take your comment. I'm totally happy that you made that. And it's going to make me think about the kinds of titles that I give to future work, whether it's documentary or not. I don't know yet if I will make another documentary because I had such a difficult time trying to make this one. Someone asked a question about why didn't I get footage of people in the cinemas and all. Thank you for asking that question, but you don't know how hard I tried. I spent every waking minute making phone calls, emailing people, visiting them, just trying to get their attention and also to get them to give me the resources that I needed for the thing. Oof. There came a time when I just said, look, I have to work with what I have. And that's what you see. So now my respect for filmmakers has gone up, can I say, in multiples, because, I just sit at my desk and I watch, I say, this is nice, that's so nice. Until I have now gotten my own hands into it and I realize that, no, these people are working incredibly, incredibly hard. I don't know if I have done justice to your questions, but thank you so much. I am indebted to you for all of the comments that you've made, and I will really think about them going forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Añuli, for responding to the queries and questions that the panelists had. I think you also addressed the questions that are also in the chat. There is one question there that has sort of come across both panelists and audience members from the chat that I just wanted to maybe advance a little more. And this is a question for you, but also for the panelists as well. So this connection between, or the disconnection, so to speak, between exhibitors, distributors, and the audience. The question came up, or the comment came up. I believe it was Tokwe that asked this question. Who is asking the audience about what they want, right? Who is interested in that? Perhaps this is a line of research that we sort of need to dig into a little more, some sort of ethnography of our audiences and their desires. But the main question I want to ask is the missing link here criticism? Do we need some sort of bridge between those people, the exhibitors, and the audience? And that bridge is film critics or film reviewers and people of that type. So this is a question for you and the panelists, actually. And I believe Shoaibu will have plenty to say about this too.
This is tomorrow's session.
Well, yes, I'm sort of advancing, sort of telescope into that conversation tomorrow at NSC.
I'm not attempting to answer this question fully because, yes, we do need to investigate it further. But something that can give us an idea, just like a peek into what's going on between the audience and the exhibitors is that, the exhibitors have data that they collect. And Film House publishes, top 25 films or top 20 films. And you can see from the box office records that the comedies are making more money than any other genre. Look at Omogeto, right? Over 600 million naira in the COVID year. December 2020, Omogeto pulled in more than 600 million. And Moses was saying that from his own experience in building the facilities and attracting audiences, comedies are it for the Nigerian audience. And that's just because that's what they would come out to watch. And I've listened to so many Nigerian film fans who say, look, the problems of Nigeria are so many. So give me a laugh any day, anytime. But again, that's something that we have to continue probing because it's insufficient to take that at face level. So comedies are making waves, and it's interesting. Another thing that Moses said, and this happens to be a bone of contention for many, particularly for filmmakers or film critics, is that many production companies are now using social media influencers. They're casting them in their films, well, even though they're not professional actors. So you have people like Bovi, for example, who's appearing. Bovi is a comedian, and he has a huge following on social media. And that many people would come out to watch these films because they already follow him, and he's going to publicize the film on his social media handles. So that's a strategy that these exhibitors, distributors are also using in deciding who gets cast in a particular role and who doesn't. And it's a sore point for many because they think that you're just commercializing film instead of actually looking for professional actors. But this is just opening up the conversation, and I'm sure that there are many takes on this, and it's something that we definitely need to research and even theorize more deeply.
All right. Does anyone? Okay. Yes. Please go ahead. I see you.
Yeah, yes, I'd like to add something. I think in general, it's difficult for production companies, studios, and cinema exhibitors to always know ahead of time what is going to make it big. When it gets to the cinema, and so not being open-minded, I think about not being open-minded and allowing other kinds of films to come to the big screen is to my mind. Well, obviously it's their money, right? And they want to make money, the cinema exhibitors. They don't want to lose money. But I think that they may be setting themselves short in not allowing a wider range of films. Clearly, comedies are very popular right now, but there might be other kinds of films that are of interest to the Nigerian audience. I mean, how many times has it happened in Hollywood that a film that was expected to bomb suddenly ends up being the sleeper, what's called the sleeper hit of the season? And I think the film director on the panel gave us an example with Up North, which was not expected to make, to make it big, but ended up doing so. So I would like to see much more adventurousness on the part of the exhibitors to allow a somewhat wider range of types of films to come to the big screen and not limit themselves to only a certain kind. I understand there's a lot of money at stake. You don't want to lose money. It's big money. But kind of like being limited to just one type. In fact, I was having this conversation maybe a week ago with someone here in California who loves Nigerian films and watches on Netflix and says, every film is the same. I'm tired. Can we not do something different? That's what she said. She said, every Niger film on Netflix is the same. Okay, we need something different now. Can we have something different? There's some space to keep doing the things, the formulas that work, but also trying additional formulas, I think.
Okay, Tony, just a minute. And the minute I want to spend this is, I think, like Prof said, these guys need to be open-minded. Some of these claims they make, like only comedy sells, that's how they will have shut out King of Boys. King of Boys was not a comedy film, but it sold. It makes big money. There are a lot of films that have come and surprised them, like Up North that my sister mentioned and all that. I think they should be more open-minded. And I think the problem, because we've been interrogating this stuff, the problem is that we still have like the exhibition system is run like only very few people. There's some monopoly in that industry, just very few people controlling the cinemas. You don't have more than 77 cinemas. And out of the 77 theaters that you have in the country, about just one production outfit controls like 50% of the 77 theater. So he has the power to decide. But if we have more screens, more theaters and the rest of them, we have more people playing in the system. I'm sure we will have some people who just say, no, we can have something else. We don't necessarily have to have comedy. And then again, one of the problems that we're having with the distribution, which we didn't actually see in the film, is there was no distinction between an exhibitor, a distributor, and there's the third leg that has escaped me now. Because Film House does, and a producer. Because Film House produces, Film House distributes, Film House exhibits. And once they don't have interest, once they don't go from the product of their research, once they don't find anything that, they don't have any interest in the work, they are likely to tell you from beginning that this film will not sell. And that's what they almost did to King of Boys, and see what King of Boys recorded in terms of numbers. So we need to really interrogate and find out beyond comedy, beyond use of influencers. People want to see good films. It's when they went to the cinemas and they found that King of Boys was a well-made film that people started coming back to the theater to watch King of Boys. And that was what motivated the filmmaker to go and try to make the part 2, which didn't do as much as the part 1 did. So we need to open up that space. They need to be open-minded, like Prof. rightly said. Thank you.
Very interesting comment, Shayu. That sort of antitrust oligopoly that you just outlined there. For those familiar with American film history, was long ago sort of smashed in the 1940s. So it's interesting that we're sort of adopting that kind of strategy in our industry in this particular time. So we've got just about 6 minutes left, and I want to use the 6 minutes, give it as an opportunity for the panelists to have like a 1 minute final reflection. So we'll start with Professor Moradu.
Wow. I don't know how much more reflecting I want to do. To Añulika, Agina, good job, great job. And thanks for getting us thinking, reflecting, asking questions. And we hope you will make more films. We hope you will, in addition to your scholarship.
Thank you. Professor Ekwazi, please.
Maybe I should use the 1 minute to. There's a point we didn't quite talk about. You raised the issue, and that's the value of criticism. The place of the critic. I think we have that. The film culture we have has really no place for the critic in the proper sense of the word.
Looks like we've lost him.
And that feels like a full word. We can leave it there. We can leave it and move to Dr. Hosseini. Oh, he's back up.
Yeah, I got a call. I'm using my phone to tapping data from my phone. I think that critics have not influenced anything in this film culture, because of the way the industry is organized, and because the critic doesn't really have much role in this industry. You find that the research on the audience has no role again in this industry. And they started with the theater people. Baba Salah and Gunde and the rest of them made their films. Remember what happened? The same audience followed them with the same film to the new medium. There was no research. And what this has done to the Nigerian film industry is that nobody cares about the audience. So people who own the theaters tell you what they think about the audience. So I think that problem is a structural problem. It's a problem that came along from time. And when Nigeria was a dumping ground, when the films came from outside, only tangential research was done here. The major research was in the exporting country. So it's like a two-pronged something. This industry has really no value for the critic, and the audience research is still at the very early beginnings.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hosseini, please.
Very quickly, Dr. Agina, congratulations, well done. Please make more films, don't be tired. stuff like this come up, here, there, I congratulate you and thank you for the opportunity to be on this panel. Thank you, Professor Tony, for a good job. And then, of course, these panelists that I've met, I wish I was around so that you can sign an autograph of my shirt. This has been a wonderful time, and I thank you for being on the panel.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right, Tokwe, please take it from here.
Also, like Dr. Fazena said, I've started from great. I've learned a lot today. I'm going to become a professor myself after this, I promise. And to Dr. Agina, please don't stop making films. Please don't stop. We look forward to seeing more from you. And thank you for this discussion. Highly enlightening. And thank you as well. Thank you. And thanks.
Thank you. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to LSA. Thank you for sharing this material with us, Añuli. Yes, please make more films. You can call on all of us, especially the panelists, to help out with your next film. We'll all rally around you. So, and thank you, panelists, for such an insightful reflection on this material and for raising very pertinent questions that we will continue to explore as we move on. So keep the networking going, and yes, and thank you, participants, for asking all those brilliant questions and your comments as well. Have a great afternoon or a great evening to you in Nigeria, and we'll meet you on other panels and tomorrow at the session on film criticism.